Hello, everyone, and you're listening to the Theology, Bible, and Discipleship to Jesus podcast, or TBD for short. This podcast is designed to help spark conversations among the people of Southridge Fellowship about exactly what you might expect: theology, the Bible, and our discipleship to Jesus. My name is Elijah Croker, and thank you so much for joining us for Season 2, The Life of Solomon. In today's episode, we are going to be talking about the temple and looking through 1 Kings chapter 5, verses 1 to 12, and chapter 8, verses 12 to 21. So wherever you're listening, get ready and let's dive right in.
All right. Well, welcome to week 4 of the podcast. And today we're going to be looking at the building of the temple, which in Solomon's life, this would have been his greatest accomplishment. In our curriculum, we're going to be covering chapters 5 to 8 in 1 Kings, but that is a lot of text. And so for the podcast, we're just going to be looking at 2 passages. The first will be 1 Kings 5, 1 to 12, which we'll be looking at the Lord commanding Saul to build the temple. And then the second one will be 1 Kings 8, verse 12 to 21, where it's going to be looking at the Lord's presence in the temple. And so Greg and Linda will both read a text.
I will begin, and I am reading from 1 Kings chapter 5, 1 to 12. When Hiram, king of Tyre, heard that Solomon had been anointed king to succeed his father David, he sent his envoys to Solomon because he had always been on friendly terms with David. Solomon sent back this message to Hiram. You know that because of the wars waged against my father David from all sides, he could not build a temple for the name of the Lord his God until the Lord put his enemies under his feet. But now the Lord my God has given me rest on every side, and there is no adversary or disaster. I intend, therefore, to build a temple for the name of the Lord my God, as the Lord told my father David when he said, Your son, whom I will put on the throne in your place, will build the temple for my name. So give orders that cedars of Lebanon be cut for me. My men will work with yours, and I will pay you for your men whatever wages you set. You know that we have no one so skilled in felling timber as the Sidonians. When Hiram heard Solomon's message, he was greatly pleased and said, Praise be to the Lord today, for he has given David a wise son to rule over his great nation. So Hiram sent word to Solomon, I have received the message you sent me and will do all you want in providing the cedar and juniper logs. My men will haul them down from Lebanon to the Mediterranean Sea, and I will float them as rafts by sea to the place you specify. There I will separate them, and you can take them away. And you are to grant my wish by providing food for my royal household. In this way, Hiram kept Solomon supplied with all the cedar and juniper logs he wanted. And Solomon gave Hiram 20,000 cores of wheat as food for his household, in addition to 20,000 baths of pressed olive oil. Solomon continued to do this for Hiram year after year. The Lord gave Solomon wisdom, just as he had promised him. There were peaceful relations between Hiram and Solomon, and the two of them made a treaty.
And then 1 Kings 8, starting in verse 12, reading until verse 21, it says, Then Solomon said, The Lord has said that he would dwell in a dark cloud. I have indeed built a magnificent temple for you, a place for you to dwell forever. While the whole assembly of Israel was standing there, the king turned around and blessed them. Then he said, Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, who with his own hand has fulfilled what he promised with his own mouth to my father David. For he said, Since the day I brought my people Israel out of Egypt, I have not chosen a city in any tribe of Israel to have a temple built so that my name might be there, but I have chosen David to rule my people Israel. My father David had it in his heart to build a temple for the name of the Lord, the God of Israel. But the Lord said to my father David, You did well to have it in your heart to build a temple for my name. Nevertheless, you are not the one to build the temple, but your son, your own flesh and blood. He is the one who will build the temple for my name. The Lord has kept the promise he made. I have succeeded David, my father, and now I sit on the throne of Israel, just as the Lord promised, and I have built the temple for the name of the Lord, the God of Israel. I provided a place there for the ark, in which is the covenant of the Lord that he made with our ancestors when he brought them out of Egypt.
Awesome. Thank you for reading those texts. Either Greg or Linda, I don't know who wants to take on this question, but what role and function did the temple play for the nation of Israel? Greg's pointing at Linda. I think it's yours.
Yes. It played functions in the moment, in the historical context of Israel as a nation at the time, but the concept of the temple continues on in Scripture all the way into eternity. It is representative of the presence of God, of God's relational nature, his desire to be with people, to have a relationship, to dwell among us, for us to be with him. And so the temple in Israel's history represented God's presence with them. It represented, because the covenant was there, it was a tangible reminder that he had made promises to them of his faithfulness and that they could count on him. It was a place to go to deal with their sin, to offer sacrifices and to receive God's mercy. And it was a place to gather to hear God's word and to learn the law and to understand God's ways. As you move on into the New Testament, then Jesus came. He calls his body the temple because he is now, it's God visibly, tangibly in person, in a body dwelling amongst us. And then further on in the New Testament, we are the temple of God, both individually and corporately. We are his dwelling place. And when you get to heaven, there's a temple in heaven and there is a new city. And then it says, toward the end of Revelation, there's no temple in heaven, but there is the new Jerusalem, which is the church or the believers, and that is God's dwelling place. So in the end, we become the dwelling place of God, and we are organically tied to him for all eternity. So it's a picture that moves from this place of, it's great that God's here, but there's separation and he's holy and we can't go in, to how God removes all those barriers and ties us as closely as possible to his presence when we get to eternity.
What a big job God gave Solomon, just as you're describing the temple, what it is, and then even looking all the way to eternity. And God gave that 17-year-old boy, he called him, and that was his job. That's pretty significant. Do you have anything to add to that, Greg, before we move on?
No, that was great.
Okay. Yeah, that was good. Well, Greg, maybe you want to answer the question, how does the construction and function of the temple form our understanding of the character of God?
Yeah, one of the things that I think we are to learn about the construction of the temple, and even how the priests are to engage in the temple, one of the emphases is the holiness of God. And that God is not a God to be trifled with or to be like domesticated in any way. And so it also struck me when it was being read this time in a way that I don't know if it had before, that God, this isn't the first time God's presence was located in the people of Israel. You have the tabernacle already, and the Ark of the Covenant being in the tabernacle. And so, it's interesting that I'm happy to be wrong and to be corrected, but from what I understand, the temple itself was not a command from God to the people. It was the people of Israel saying, this is a good thing for us to do as a nation, to build a temple, because God already had a location among the nation. But like it says in here, God was like, this is a good idea. Like David had it in his heart to build a temple for God. And God's like, cool, go for it. But if someone's going to build it, it won't be you. It'll be your son. Cause I don't want the blood hands to be the one responsible for building the temple, but like, good idea. So I do think even from the beginning, this idea of the temple, seems to me as a like temporary part of God's plan. It wasn't, again, someone can send in the email or during the week that we're studying this can show me where I'm wrong about God commanding the building of the temple. But it's a good thing that the people did. And once they decided they were going to do it, God was like, well, if you're going to do it then you're going to do it this way. And he definitely gave instructions for how to build the temple. And it's in those parts that I think it makes it really clear the holiness of God is not something for us to just take lightly. And so, which makes to jump ahead to the New Testament, probably sooner than Linda might like, but I'm going to go there anyways. It makes the scene in the crucifixion of Jesus and when he dies, the tearing of the veil in the temple, such a, like, we read that and we glaze over it. But if you were to live and breathe the story of the people of Israel, that veil being torn is unbelievable, because not only the practicality of a piece of cloth that thick just splitting in two, that's impressive, but the theological implications of it, meaning that now what was reserved as a space of holiness is now being spread out, and unfettered by the veil in front of it. That's quite something to happen, which would have been a main reason why I think you would have had some of those early Jewish believers who were around the temple at that time would probably have been like, what just happened that veil tore into? Because it would have probably freaked them right out. Like, the implications of that veil tearing is not just like a cool thing, it's a dangerous thing.
Yeah.
Because the holiness of God is now moved out from just the temple.
Totally.
So my mind went there, but I mean, we can continue the conversation. The temple has lots of implications for how we think about our Christian life.
Yeah, I think that will just flow into, I guess, the question of how does the construction and function of the temple form our understanding of the character of God?
Yeah. I mean, holiness is one of the big takeaways for me. And what makes, in my mind, the incarnation of Jesus that much more miraculous, when we really give ourselves the time to think about the depth of the holiness of God, and then the scandal of that holy God enfleshing himself to tabernacle among us, which is the word that is used in John, that he dwelt among us. He tabernacled amongst us in the flesh, that the holy God of Israel has become the child in the manger, is a staggering claim.
I think too, if you read through these chapters, you kind of get bogged down in details, like all the little bits and pieces of how this was built. And Solomon has parameters. He can't just decide how this is supposed to look. It is the exact same size as the tabernacle. It has the same rooms. It has the same pieces of furnishings in it. And he has to he's giving it his very, very best. He's finding the best people he can, because there is a picture here of God deserving the worship and the best that we can do, and God caring about every little detail, about every little pomegranate and lotus flower and candlestick that's in the thing. And then when you see that we are the dwelling place of God, we take it far too lightly that God dwells among us, and we think, we can just have our little mess and God should be happy to live in our mess. According to this, no, God is not. He expects our best, and his idea of what his dwelling place should be and what he will make us to be when he's done with us is perfection. And it is beautiful, and it is exactly to his instructions and his measurements. We don't get to make the church be what we want it to be. It is God's, and it's his right to make it what he wants it to be. And he will finish it and make it perfect when he's done.
Yeah, what's interesting in the New Testament, when to bring out that imagery of the church being the place where God dwells, is we don't have instructions now about material things. but we do have instructions about our fruit of the Spirit and virtues and the kinds of clothing, the imagery of putting on clothing as though putting on the virtues, the characteristics of God. That's how he's now aiming this imagery. And so if we carry that same level of kind of intensity and intentionality of the pomegranate and the lotus flower to now gentleness and kindness, and being as insistent on being a people of gentleness as we would have been on the placement of the lotus flower, it's an interesting parallel to think through.
Yeah, for sure. It makes me just think of, you guys know the reference, I'm blanking on it, but just that verse that says like, we are God's temple. And then thinking about in the Old Testament, and if you actually read through those chapters of 5, 6, 7, 8 of First Kings, just like the detail, the intention, the holiness, the beauty, do you think that we can flesh out a little bit of just we are God's temple, which I know that Greg, you kind of touched on talking about putting on that gentleness, but is there more there that we can explore?
I just did a quick search on Google, and I think it's 1 Corinthians 3:16, where Paul's talking about the church being equivalent to the temple of God. And so, I think reframe that question for me, because I was Googling and then I heard you say my name.
It's all good. In light of what we're talking about with the temple and all the detail and the beauty and the holiness and the power of the temple, what does it mean to be the temple? Kind of like that passage says.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I think two things. One would be that the local church is the place where we are the expression of worship for God. And, the people of Israel being the place where the people that worship God, they did that in the temple. And so now when we gather as the church, our primary job is to be worshiping God and to have our thoughts and our minds and affections geared towards him. And so that's why the gathering of the church is not this side task, but it's a primary thing that we need to do, because it's where God is worshiped. Now we know in other passages that, we have a duty to worship God in all areas of our life and all hours of our week. But just because those things are true doesn't mean we can't also say that it's true that we come to worship God together as a people. But also the fact that the temple wasn't just for the people of Israel, that it is this location for the world to come and encounter the living God. And yes, there were rules and situations and conditions attached to it, but that doesn't negate the fact that the temple was this place, was this symbol of the presence of the one true God, and the nations being invited to pray and experience this God. And so the local church is also not just a worshiping community. It's a mission community. It's a community that is engaged in the mission of helping the world hear the goodness of the one true God and how he's worthy to be worshiped because of his holiness and his goodness, and that being seen most clearly in his son, Jesus.
I think there's a piece too, that in the ancient world, temples represented the greatness and the worth of the God that was being worshiped in them. And the temple that ended up being built was absolutely stunning. There's just so much gold in here and so much beauty in it, and there's the perfect cube of the most holy place, and there's the brilliant light of God's presence, and there's the mercy seat, and there's all of these, the gold cherubims. It's beautiful. It represents the glory of, in some very tiny way, the glory of the God that we worship, and we are supposed to do that. We don't have big buildings and gold and carvings and embroidered hangings and gold cherubim. We have our lives by which to do that. And so we are supposed to represent in the way we live the glory of the God we worship, which is what the temple did in a little tiny way, and what we do in a very inadequate way as well. But we are supposed to do better than we do.
Wow. It is, I don't know, I just find it really humbling thinking about the temple in the Old Testament and what's described, and then that just the reality that we are his temple and we get to walk in that, or we're called to walk in just that holiness and beauty that God designed. Do you guys have any final thoughts on this topic before we wrap up here?
Just that I think the temple of God in the life of Solomon should be a reminder to us that that we can't domesticate God, that he is not a thing or a person for our use when and if we want it or want him. That's not the God of the Bible, and that's not the God that Jesus shows us. And so there needs to be not a somberness, but a seriousness with which we think about God. And I think sometimes we can be a bit flippant in our particular branch of Christianity, that is the evangelical church, that sometimes we don't think about God with that right kind of he is holy. And so it's a good reminder for us about the holiness of God.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I could add anything else to that. This was an astronomical task, and privilege. Solomon was given to do this. It took him 7 years. It was extremely expensive. His father had accumulated a lot of the supplies. It took countless man hours to do it. And yet that's even what he built is nothing compared to what God is building in the church, in taking us and making us into something that will reflect his glory forever. We should take it as seriously as Solomon took the building of the temple.
Yes, that's awesome. Well, thank you guys for sharing your insights, and we will catch you all next week on the podcast.
Thank you so much, Tikva, Greg, and Linda, for talking about the temple and just reminding us just how holy God is. And thank you so much for listening. We would love to hear from you, and if you have any questions or comments, send them to tbd@southridgefellowship.com. That's tbd@southridgefellowship.com. And let's remember to be doers of the word and not hearers only. Goodbye, everyone.